Hello and welcome to this special webinar on achieving the full potential of smart mining. My name is Carly Leonida and it's a pleasure to welcome you here today on behalf of Axora, the digital solutions marketplace for industrial innovators. Now, in terms of the schedule for today, we'll have a 45-minute panel discussion followed by 15 minutes of questions and answers. So if you have any questions for our panel, please pop them in the box at the bottom of the screen and we'll come to those in due course. Now, there's been a slight change to the speaker schedule today. Michelle Ash and Joe Carr couldn't make it, so instead, in the studio with me today is Mark Fraser, Account Director at Axora. Over the past 2 decades, Mark has held various senior research, consulting and sales roles within highly respected firms in the natural resources sector. Mark's research roles focused on mining, metals and electricity, while his consulting engagements focused on market entry strategies for mining and metals companies and supporting the negotiation of long-term agreements along the supply chain. At Axora, Mark is working on growing the business in the metals and mining sector. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
And then joining us via the web today, we have Augustin Costa, Managing Director and Partner at Boston Consulting Group. Augustin supports global mining clients in digital transformation, analytics, operational improvement, strategy and organization. He's a professor on innovation and digital transformation at Universidad de Chile's Mining Industry MBA. He holds an industrial engineering degree from the Instituto Tecnológico de Buenos Aires and has a technical degree in electronics and telecommunications, as well as an MBA degree with distinction from Harvard Business School. Welcome, Augustin.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. So now to our theme for today, which is achieving the full potential of smart mining. Now, today, most mining and metals companies clearly understand the value of digitalisation, and many of them have ambitious strategies in place to transform their businesses. The benefits are clear. Digitalising mining operations makes them safer and more productive. It also enables companies to become more predictive and agile, allowing them to produce significant returns, even as operating costs increase and commodity prices remain volatile. To achieve these goals, mining companies need to close the gap between digital strategy and execution. But despite the promise of transformation, the industry still exhibits a significant gap, around 30%, between its digital strategy score and its execution score, according to a recent report by Axora and Boston Consulting Group. Now, given that demand for certain minerals and metals is set to skyrocket over the next decade, it's really important that the industry moves to close this gap and prepare itself to take advantage of future growth opportunities. So my first question for our panelists is, what are your thoughts on the current level of digital readiness across the mining industry? Mark, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay, and then we'll open the floor to discussion.
Thanks, Carly. Well, I think, thoughts on the current level of digital readiness, the field is incredibly varied, both in the types of mines in the world, and the scale of mining operations and how mature certain mining companies are. And their ability to digitally transform their businesses varies massively as well. Both in terms of the resources that they have that they can put to the projects and the skills that they have within their companies. And indeed, even the ambitions that they have changed depending on the types of mining companies, the locations, the scale, and so on. Although I think, one thing that we have seen over the last 12 months with COVID is that across the board, the ambition and the readiness and the ability to transform their businesses has accelerated. COVID has been, the great accelerator, essentially. I think there's one study that's come out that has said that COVID's accelerated digital adoption, within mining by up to 7 years. I think the types of discussions that we've been having with companies, we wouldn't say it's quite that extreme. What I've been hearing is really a 2 to 3 year acceleration is more average. I would say is the average from the discussions that I've been having. And really, why is that? That's in any digital transformation project, there's a lot of bringing different stakeholders on board. Essentially selling the project internally to get everyone on board and pointing in the same direction. And in many respects, COVID's helped in that first phase of a project to really accelerate that part of the phase. So, in order to sell the project, get hearts and minds on board. In many respects, COVID's sort of done that phase, for the company. I guess the other thing that we've seen is the wide adoption also of wearable technology, which has also been advanced by COVID. So whether that be smart watches, beacons, phones, tablets, and so on, there's been a wide adoption of that in a number of mining companies, and really that provides another platform, I think, for future technologies to be layered on top of those new platforms. So I think really to summarize, it's a really varied landscape, but things really across the board, I think it's progressing now a lot faster, and it's really at the top of the agenda for most mining companies. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a mining company that doesn't think that digital and technological transformation is a key priority for their business. I would say it's one of the key priorities for every mining company out there.
Yeah, I'd agree. Things have really hit home over the last year or so. Augustine, are you seeing similar?
Yeah, so I would agree with Mark, and I think that if I take a step back and think of the various different industries, because we do get asked this question quite a lot. It's not that the technology is not there. When you see the digital transformation that some other industries have been through, retail, banking, even logistics, and you've seen the digital advancement that they have, and then you say, what has happened with mining? And actually, our digital acceleration index shows that mining industries are still behind other industries in terms of digital transformation. But I think that what people forget is that there's a fundamental difference between those industries in which they had to digitally transform because they were at risk of disruption. When you think about retail, banking, they are at the risk of disruption. I think that the difference with mining companies and metals companies and in general the industrial sector is not so much that they are at risk of disruption, but that they could benefit, and there's a potential upside and full potential to be captured because of digital transformation. And so while that is a motivator, it's not as strong as just being extinguished. And I think that also relates to the point that Mark raised, that COVID accelerated many of these trends, particularly around autonomy, remotization, wearables, and technologies that enable. We've seen Center for Integrated Operations and remote operations in mining really accelerating throughout COVID. And that's born out of necessity. It's always a much stronger driver than potential upside or potential benefit. But I think that as they started to go down that path, they start to realize that there's plenty of value to capture from that. And there's also some other aspects, I would say, of digital transformation that have been capturing the attention of miners quite a lot, which have to do particularly with advanced analytics and artificial intelligence. That is maybe not one of those that got accelerated with COVID, but there was a trend there. But that now they are starting to see that it's a low capex, high benefit type of implementation. But of course, it's really hard, as Mark mentioned. You have to convince people to work differently, and these are very, very traditional industries. And if you don't have that fear of disruption, it's something that is hard to do.
Okay, that leads nicely into my next question. So what are the issues, you've already alluded to a few, that are preventing metals and mining companies from fully executing on their digital innovation strategies? Augustine, would you like to start us on this one? You've already added a few thoughts.
Yeah, so I think that there are a number of things that prevent mining companies to fully materialize these benefits. I think that one of the first ones is just aiming for perfect and just wanting to mining companies, metal companies, and in general industrial sectors. They are all made up by engineers. I know I'm one of those. so and we tend to think of processes and outcomes, and everything has to be planned in a very meticulous way. And the aiming for perfect is part of our DNA, I would say. When you think about technology, it's much more about developing the minimum viable product, developing the first pilot, understanding how that works, and then improve it from there. And we've been taught, particularly by the software industry, that that's the path to have successful technology products and technology deliveries. And I think that changing that mindset for industrial companies is a bit difficult. The other one I would say is what we call the syndrome of shiny toys, which is
that in mining.
many times, So many times you have technology, you have potential use cases or potential technology implementations that look nice, that are cool. I would say that one of those, for instance, is the use of drones. For instance, that it's cool, but when you boil it down to, okay, what's the value delivered? What's the actual way in which you're changing what you do, and what's the impact on bottom line on using that technology? When you go down that path, there are many technology projects that fail to deliver value. And if mining companies go down to quite a lot of those ones and go a lot after shiny toys, then after some time they become a bit, disappointed by the value that can be created through technology and digital transformation.
I agree, and I think that seems to be a particular problem with things like autonomous truck implementations. It's all very well and good having these toys, but then you've got to put the systems and processes into the business and the organization behind it to make sure that you get the full value from those as well. Mark, what are your thoughts?
Well, I was going to say, I think the fear of disruption that Augustine alluded to earlier, is a major element that is preventing transformation in some ways. All mines are motivated around producing as much as they can for as little at as little cost per ton as they can, and making sure that they're doing that safely and respecting the environment. And they all have systems in place, typically to drive a certain level of production. Coming along with a shiny new toy or a piece of equipment that you want to plug into that chain is difficult in many respects, because by definition you disrupt the flow for days, weeks, months, and every day of disruption is money at the end of the day. So change in this industry is difficult. They're big, typically big operations, and well-oiled operations in a sense, and to disrupt that flow is difficult and is expensive.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing that I see also, market volatility, and a sort of a need or a desire rather to have quite short-term, reasonably short-term projects with short-term paybacks. Obviously the quicker the payback is great for everyone, right? But that does sort of limit the scope in some ways of the transformation projects that companies are embarking on.
Absolutely. So how can we overcome some of these issues then? Do you find, both of you, I suppose, that organisations tend to take a top-down approach when it comes to digital transformation? And how does that sort of link into on-site personnel and their adoption as well?
Yeah, I think that is a... sorry, Mark.
Go ahead.
I think that's particularly one of the pitfalls that we see, that the transformation is driven top down, and And that actually is one of the things that get companies carried away with shiny toys, right? Because they don't fully see what's the impact on the bottom line. So during the research that we did, we also found out that there was a bit of a disconnect between the end user of what the technology is going to be and who gets to implement it. If you think about the changes again that software development has gone through, and that they are now developing solutions through Agile instead of waterfall, one of the key things is to be centered around the user. Here, the user is going to be the operator, and getting their input into developing, not just into implementing, but also developing the solution and tailoring the solution to specifics on site is critical to get that adoption going. And so becoming this internal customer centric approach is critical to do that. And in order to do that, you also have to think through of tailored solutions. So this is not, yes, you have to pick from the best that the market can do, but then you also have to tailor it to the specific solutions on site and to the specific solutions for each mining company, because otherwise it's going to feel a lot like this comes top-down driven. And what we see in the Digital Acceleration Index is that actually companies that become more successful with digital transformation are the ones that tend to have that in mind and tailor much more their approach to the internal user.
It sounds like that customizing element is really important then.
Yeah, I totally agree.
It is. Yeah. Go ahead, Mark.
No, I was just going to say I totally agree with what you said. That's what we see as well. That exactly what you said. I haven't really got anything to add to on what Augustine's just said.
Okay, I think it's worth as well touching upon kind of siloing, because the mining industry, at an operational level, at a business level even, tends to operate in quite a siloed way. How does having those sort of isolated departments prevent companies from executing on their strategies?
Maybe I can take a first thought at that one, because I think that's a super critical one. I think that we can all agree that that is typically the case in mining operations, and there's always like the two big silos that are typically there are mine and plant, which sometimes seem to be even different companies. And to be fair, the operations are quite different. One is around the fixed equipment, the other one is much more around the mobile equipment, much more flexible. And of course, the nature and the characteristics of each one is different, and it is an issue beyond digital transformation that they tend to work a lot in silos. But when we think about digital, there's a very, very strong network effect that gets boosted when those silos start to break and they start to work together. And let me give you an example of that. So there are some use cases around advanced analytics and around artificial intelligence in mining that we've been deploying, for instance, in copper companies, trying to optimize the operating parameters of rougher concentrators and the rougher circuit within the concentrator to reduce the copper that gets deployed in the tailings, and therefore increasing the recovery of metal. You can think about that use case as a silo and just see the parameters that you have within the plant and try to see using artificial intelligence what are the best combinations of reagents that you can do, airflow, froth depth, etc., as a number of parameters that get defined at the plant and that you can see based on historical performance and have an engine, a machine learning engine that learns about historical performance and recommends to the operator potential optimizations on how to recover more copper. But that use case that in itself may add value and as a standalone may add value, we've seen that when we combine that with what we call, sometimes called is a mineral tracking system. So basically that you can connect that engine of recommendation with very specific information on what type of mineral is coming through the mine, which is something that is a bit complex to do because you have to model and you have to build dynamic simulation models to understand how the ore flows through the SAG mill, through the ball mills, through the stocks, and how long it takes for the stocks to deploy the mineral. But when you do that, and you can understand what type of mineral is it that you're processing right now, then the recommendation gets a boost because you're not just making the recommendations on past performance, you're making recommendations on past performance, but also on a deep understanding on what is the type of mineral that you're processing right now. In order to do that, it requires to bring down the silo between mine and plant. But it really enhances in this case, the use case solutions that can be deployed in artificial intelligence in the whole mine operation.
Good point.
Yeah, I think the silos are almost so well established that in some ways we almost stop thinking about them. And having taking on what Augustine's just said, I think, yes, there are silos, they're very well established, but there are great opportunities within those silos as well. But obviously when you connect the whole mine up, the scale of opportunity and the scale of payback, changes considerably. But I think how you get to a whole mine transformation is a number of smaller agile projects that fit together into an overall plan rather than one big bang type operation. That would be my experience of what I've seen.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Mark on that point, and I think that it's worth pointing out that breaking down these silos doesn't mean that you don't get to add value by individual use cases, but that you have to think through how they integrate. And I think that Mark's example is something that also points to a potential pitfall in digital transformation for mining companies. I've seen some companies that say, oh, you know what? In order to start doing, for instance, artificial intelligence use cases, I have to first develop a whole layer of data and cloud-based services that will have all the OT indicators, all the tags, and I have to put it all together. And then I start building use cases, I start deploying technology. Mm-hmm. When in reality, what we see that what is most effective is to think through in a modular way, and in a modular way that is driven by the use case, driven by the specific solution that you want to deploy, and build the stacks so that it can then, in a modular way, integrate with other use cases that you have down the path. But it's not like building layers of technology in order to then start thinking about the use case. That will take you years, and by the time that you build this layer, it's probably going to be outdated. So thinking through the use cases and the technology stacks that you need to deploy those, and then have a strategic view of the map of how these use cases start to integrate. And that is where the most value lies.
Mm-hmm.
That's an important point, actually. Mark and I were discussing earlier how technologies are moving so fast these days. How can you make sure that you put down really good foundations so that the digital transformation efforts are sustainable over time as well? That's really important.
Yeah, exactly. But we talk to obviously companies all the time, and we hear quite often that, what they're focusing on now is just the data. They're wanting to get all the data in good shape, in place, all the sensors in place, and so forth, in order to do the sort of the next phase. When, as Augustine says, it can take so long to do that you kind of miss the boat in the process. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think data quality and, making sure that all that history around it is important. But as you said, you've got to move quickly to make sure you're getting the benefit from it today as well as tomorrow. And
also, I think in terms of getting sort of skills into your business, it's important to sort of effectively bite off what you can work with. Get the skills into your business, get some projects going and happening, and be successful, and then build on your successes, as opposed to trying to do everything in a sort of like I said, a sort of a big bang type approach is fraught with danger, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that what Mark is alluding to, it's not just the skills of understanding digital, but also on the ways of working. We've mentioned several times that in order to successfully deploy technology solutions, but particularly advanced analytics, visualization, and machine learning solutions, it requires to work them in an agile way, and that requires a fundamental change in how managers think about the solutions. I mentioned that we as engineers, and I mentioned this aiming for perfect, at the beginning of our webinar. I think that taking out that myth of having the perfect solution, and being able to see a preliminary version, a version maybe 0.5, but that you can interact and provide feedback on that solution is critical. And that the challenge is not so much the skills of of the developers or the data scientists. What that really requires is a change in mindset from the managers, that they are able to react to something that is half-baked, that is minimum viable product enough, but that is half-baked to provide input and to perfect over time. If you take a minimum viable product to a mine manager and they say, oh, but this is not complete, then that's not super helpful, and it doesn't promote this iterative seeking of the solution for different use cases.
That's where company culture and change management come in, I suppose. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. And in BCG, and you may have seen this, Carly, when driving solutions, particularly the ones around artificial intelligence for mining and for digital transformations in general, we have this 70-20-10 rule, where we say, the success of actually driving these transformations is 20% in the technology, 10% in the algorithms, and 70% in change management. And the reason for that is that today, and with platforms, for instance, like Axora, is even easier to access the technology and the algorithms, but you still have to drive the change management. It still requires a change in how managers and operators and superintendents are going to be changing the way they do their work on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. And so what other steps can mining companies take, both at an operational and an organisational level, to make sure that they follow through on their digital transformation strategies? Again, Augustine, would you like to start us?
Yeah, sure. So I think that first off, even though, as we mentioned, a while ago, even though it's not the right thing to have, the top-down implementation, you do require the top-down commitment. So we see that, successful digital transformations are not the ones that are driven by, mid-level managers that want to, implement technology, but one that has a view from the top down. And I think it's important to have that view that Mark was mentioning on the overall value chain and on the overall, how does it all fit, right? What's the overall view of the roadmap of technology that I want to deploy? And it doesn't have to be perfect, and it will be changed over time, but you have to have that that long-term view and that full, value chain view of the use cases and the digital solutions that you want to implement. I think that's probably number one. Number two is, and we mentioned this several times during the webinar, so working in Agile, it's critical and enabling the organization to work in that way. And number three is making sure that you track the value that the technology is generating, and that you pivot quickly out of use cases that do not drive value. And in order to do that, of course, you have to work in Agile and you have to have this integrated mindset. But having a very rigorous approach to, is this creating value? Even if it's a minimum viable product, am I doing something different with this that is driving me to have more production, better price realization because of a less contaminated concentrate, better utilization of my trucks, lower costs. Just try to understand really, what is the value being generated, and to have a rigorous tracking of that value. That will enable the sustainability of digital transformation for mining and metals companies, because as they start to see the value there, then it's easier to keep investing, right? Because you're very easily seeing the repayment of the capital deployed in those technologies. If you don't have that very strict value tracking, then you cannot tell for sure whether the capital that you're deploying is actually yielding value. And I think that's very important. And maybe the fourth one would be around modular technology. And I think Mark also alluded to this, building use case by use case, but making sure that then you can easily integrate everything without doing the whole stack of technology first and then thinking through how you're going to leverage all that info that you put available in the cloud.
Actually, just a note on that sort of modularity, I guess this is where it's really important that companies choose solutions that are truly open when it comes to data and will allow them to build upon and connect the modules together to integrate them as they go forward. Because the last thing you want is to invest in something that's, not going to be sustainable in the future, or you're not going to be able to build upon.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important that the companies maintain access to the data that their machinery's creating. In some cases that's not the case. So the data is key essentially in the whole thing. So the company needs to have access and preferably ownership of that data, I think, as it's being developed within their operation.
Absolutely. Okay, and so how can innovation departments attract the necessary expertise to execute on these digital transformation strategies? As you said, people are so critical to this change, to making it work.
Yeah, I think I think it is difficult for them to attract. In some ways, mining's not it's not a sort of a star, an industry that's sort of up in lights as a really attractive industry for someone straight out of university to work in. So I do think it's difficult. It's got a bit of a reputation of being a little bit sort of old school. However, I would say there's a lot to do in the mining industry, a huge amount to do, and I think also the mining industry is really a key industry when we look to some of the kind of key problems on the planet with respect to climate change. Indeed some of the solutions for the climate problem will come from minerals and metals that are invariably mined that that are needed. For example, the more windmills you have, the more electric cars you have, and so on. The more copper you're going to need, the more lithium you're going to need, and so on. So I think it's from that point of view, it's it's potentially I think it's a very interesting industry, because I think there's a lot to do, and there's a huge amount of potential to go into. As Augustine was saying, something like banking or retail. In many respects, those transformations are way further down. They're way further down the sort of transformation journey. So if you've got ambition to really make a change, I think something like mining is a really attractive industry at the moment.
I agree, and I'm hopeful that the more that we digitalise as well, the more it will attract, key talent from other industries who have got perhaps a bit more experience or different perspectives on how we can make this change more sustainable. I see that being a really key point in recruitment and retention going forward.
Yeah, and I think that also one enabler for driving that talent has also been, strangely, has been COVID as well. Because it had made it quite more visible that remote working is easier. So part of the kind of the difficulty for mining and metals company has always been location and also how you get talent when you're competing with for data scientists or for developers that work comfortably in a city, in a bank, in a retail company, and now with the barriers low for actually doing remote work and understanding that much further, I think that's probably one step in the right direction. It is still true that mining companies are facing for the first time a war on talent, not against other mining companies, not against other industrial companies, but against retail, banking, and technology companies, to be fair. Now they are trying to get, data scientists or data engineers from Google or from Microsoft. And it's hard. But I think that part of of what Mark mentioned, there's everything to do. It's kind of like whoever is up to the challenge, it's like a fantastic challenge to have, because there's really a lot to do here. And I think that the ESG angle as well is quite important. And we see, for instance, now, we see digital and analytics teams that are deploying use case solutions to reduce freshwater consumption in concentrators and in what they put into the tailings, and that's just beneficial for for the environment, and I think it's also one driver that particularly the new upcoming workforce is valuing quite a lot, to be able to make a difference in that direction, because we are still going to need industrial inputs and particularly from what we call are the future metals: copper, lithium, cobalt, and so being able to improve what's the impact that they have on the environment and communities is also part of what is being enabled through technology.
I agree. That's absolutely key going forward. I just can't see a way that we're going to be able to, accurately and report these figures in a timely manner as well, if we haven't got this digital transformation pinned down. Mm-hmm. Okay, so where could the mining and metals industry be in 5 to 10 years if companies really refocus their efforts and double down on closing the execution gap today? Mark, would you like to start?
Well, I think you'll see, I think you'll sort of see more of everything on a level. What I mean by that is, we'll definitely see more remote control. We might see more autonomy in some operations. We'll definitely see less people working in underground, I would say. We'll see more electrification, so more connectivity in terms of gathering data from sensors and using that data to make decisions and control operations to a greater degree. I think, broadly speaking, we'll see more efficient, safer mining, with all of these technologies being brought into play. I think, electrification, if you just think about electrification underground is a really interesting one. If you can change the way that you're doing your underground mining to take, diesel burning vehicles out from that environment, it has a knock-on effect for ventilation and things like that. It has a knock-on effect just purely for people's health. And there are technologies now that, can be deployed, using conveyor belts more extensively, or using mini railways more extensively, or electric vehicles, or, that type of thing. So, I think, we'll see big changes in the mining industry in the next 5 or 10 years, massive changes. And I think digital's, frankly, at the forefront of all of those changes.
And hopefully as companies see success with those slightly smaller projects, that will give them the confidence to go on and take those initiatives and make them more of an enterprise-wide
exactly.
initiative. Augustin, how about you?
So I agree with Mark. I think that we're going to see a step change in efficiency, particularly so when we see the use of resources and recovery and how much diesel we use in trucks per moved ton of ore. All of that is going to be coming down, and a lot of these use cases are actually going to help in that direction. The other way in which I think we'll see mining companies change significantly is with the amount of people that they have on site. I don't think that there will be replacing workers, but that workers will be much more working remotely. I also don't think that advanced analytics, machine learning, artificial intelligence will replace operators. They will just enhance their decisions. And I think that we are going to see that play out in the next 3 to 5 years.
I agree. Okay, so that brings us nicely to the end of the panel discussion, but I can see that we've got a few questions coming through from the audience as well, so let's take a look at some of those. The first one was, what lessons can we learn from other industries when working to close the execution gap in mining? Which of you would like to take that one? So
I think that we partially alluded to some of to part of the answer. There's no one silver bullet, but working in Agile and working with the internal customer in mind when we deploy the solution, and even when we design the solution, is a big part of the answer. If you think through, the changes that we know, take out your smartphone, take a look at the apps that you have, and the way that apps have been perfected, and the way that bank services and retail services have been perfected is because they started centering much more around the individual and the end user. And the way in which they've been able to do that is because now they have basically live feedback from us. If you think through who is the internal client in mining companies, is the operator, is the guys that are in the trenches, and working with the equipment and the machinery. And if mining companies can realize that they are working and developing technology for them to be more efficient, for them to be more effective in their day-to-day, I think that's the unlock.
Agreed. Okay. So another one that we have, can you name one or two mining companies, or indeed companies from other industries, that have successfully transformed their businesses using digital technologies? Is there anyone that you can point to and say they've done a good job on this?
Well, thinking about mining companies, in my opinion, the larger companies, the so-called majors, if you like, the BHPs, Rio Tintos of the world are definitely more advanced in terms of digitalization and development of technology than the smaller companies. However, talking about what Augustine was talking to before, we haven't really seen anyone who's essentially gone end to end in their transformation. The big sort of projects from the majors that you think about are things like autonomous trains or autonomous trucks or other sort of levels of autonomy and remote control centers and so forth. But I don't think anyone's really gone from exploration, really understanding what's in the ground, then being able to mine exactly what they want to mine, based on exploration and the work that they've done, and then really track that material all the way through their process and optimize their process for the material, that they know is coming through. And in my opinion, nobody's there yet. In some cases, the technology's perhaps not quite there yet. Certainly for various parts of the process. But the one thing we know about technology is it's changing all the time, it's improving all the time, and ultimately we will get there. But I can't really point to anyone and say, oh, they've completely nailed it. They've got the whole process, digitalized as such, and have machine learning and other techniques to learn, how to really optimize that. So I wouldn't say anyone's sort of done it. So the real benefits of digital transformation are still to be exposed, essentially, by in my opinion, the whole industry.
I guess, and the tricky thing with businesses like that, they're so huge, the scale is so vast. That it's going to take a long time to pivot those businesses for digital. They've been set up based on much more traditional systems. And I think, perhaps as smaller mining companies, the juniors, some of the startups that we're seeing come through now are going to do a fantastic job because they will have been built with digital in mind from the beginning.
Exactly. They can essentially kind of leapfrog over iterations of technology. So they don't have all those legacy systems that they're, struggling to operate their mine with 600 Excel spreadsheets, for example, things like that.
I wonder if those are the sort of companies we'll see leading the way in this over the next 10 years or so.
Yeah, and I think that also one aspect of why it is difficult to answer that question is, and I get asked this question a lot, what is digital transformation in mining companies? And there, you can think of different, pillars of what that means. And I think that mining companies have been focusing on different pillars depending on what the mining company is. One of those pillars, for instance, is automation, and that one in particular has been one where, for instance, Rio Tinto has been pioneering and set it as a key cornerstone of their technology transformation for many years. And Pioneer was one of the first companies that pioneered pretty much with autonomous haulage at their mines. Some other companies have thought through of other aspects of digital, like new businesses, and you can think, for instance, of Anglo-Americans, De Beers, and how they developed Tracer, which is a system to track diamonds using a blockchain technology that allows you to see, for instance, if that diamond comes from a legal source, let's say, and that has been how they have thought about moving into digital transformation. And some other companies, and here is where some mid-size and smaller companies can get into, is this pillar of advanced analytics and process digitalization, and that one, and the reason why that one has been easier for some smaller companies to dig into is because it requires less capex. So if you think about remotization and autonomy, it requires a huge deploy of capex, and that's why larger companies have been able to lead that the way there. When you think about artificial intelligence, then the hurdle is lower, and many other mid-sized miners are able to move faster into those areas of digital transformation as well.
Got another one here. You mentioned earlier, Augustine, that a lot of companies tend not to use sort of customized digital solutions, rather off-the-shelf ones. So what factors are preventing these companies from customizing their digital solutions?
Yeah. So it's a very good question. I think that the first one, of course, that comes to mind is that they really haven't had the need to tailor the solutions before this changes, and I think that now, and the reason was because the technology solutions that would come before this digital era relied much more on digitalizing processes and things that could be defined from the outside in. We are now facing the ability for digital solutions to not just to be customized, but tailored to the specifics, to a specific ore that you have on site. We know, those of us who work in the mining space, we know that each mine is different. And because the ore is different, and it also, of course, has different plant sizes and setups, but the mineralogy is different. If you can have solutions that are tailored to the specifics of each mine site, which is a capability that has been only very recently developed, then the value that you can extract is much more. And so I think that the companies just weren't used to say, oh, I need to customize a solution. I need to really tailor it to my mine site. And that's why they might not be, seeing the huge value that they are leaving on the table by not doing so.
Okay. And the final question, I think, as we're running low on time, how can companies better engage on-site personnel in their digital transformation efforts? Would either of you like to jump in?
In my mind, it's about selling the benefits, essentially, and engaging, making sure that the on-site personnel are actually engaged, and the engagement is proper engagement where they're actually being asked for their real input. I think that's the key thing. If as long as the engagement is genuine, I think you bring people with you. And you make sure that the way that what's being communicated is genuine and shows the benefits for them. I think people are probably a little bit hesitant at times because they're unsure about how their roles might change and so on, and feel like feel hesitant. But I think as long as companies and management are open and in their engagement, then you can bring people with you. I think it's potentially a very exciting journey. And, for anyone who's worked underground for 4 or 5 hours a day, I think, most of them aren't too worried about doing, another type of role where they're not in that sort of environment. So, I would say there's this huge upside for the on-site workers, essentially, through this transformation. And I think it's just about, how companies do that engagement is important.
Absolutely. And I think there's a generational thing here as well. As, we see Generation Z coming through, people who've grown up with mobile phones and tablets in their hands. I think they're going to be a lot more open to these new technologies too.
Yeah, and I think also working in Agile really helps in that direction. As typically when you develop a technology solution in Agile, you have the sprint review at the end of each sprint, in which you basically present to the end user. And there, for instance, in the work that we've done, we've engaged with operators, showing them the screens that they are going to have to use, for instance, to do the mineral tracking and to optimize operating parameters, and get their input and truly adapt and adjust the tool with their input. And working in Agile is something that allows you to do that in a very natural way. And I think that's also why companies that have embraced this way of deploying technology have been more successful in doing so, because it kind of obligates you to actually engage with the operators on site, who in the end will be the users of the technology that you're deploying.
Agreed. Okay, well, I think that's all we've got time for today, folks. If you'd like to watch the event again, there'll be a recording available in the coming days. And I think all that's left for me to do is to thank both Mark and Augustin for sharing your insights today. It's been a really good conversation. Thank you. And thank you also
Thanks a lot, Carly.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you also to our audience today for joining us. We'll see you again very soon.